Thank you for joining us for this episode of Chapter Chats. In this episode, I'll be chatting with Dr. Chuck Hodel about Chapter 6, Design, from his new book, Introduction to Instructional Design, Theory and Practice. Chuck, here we are, ready to discuss the design chapter. Design is a big part of ISD, as we all know, and it's a big part of the process. So could you get us started talking about what the design process looks like in ISD?
Well, if you think about instructional design and you're reading through the book and you're looking at this chapter, you probably think, this is most of what I think instructional design is all about. This is the meat and potatoes process stuff, writing objectives, putting all of the different parts together. I look at it as mission central. This is where it all revolves around. If you can get design under control and get all of your stuff together, design will make the rest of it work. And it is instructional systems development or design, however you want to name out ISD. So you would think at some point it would be the center of it. But design, I think, is key just in terms of looking at this as what we do as designers and what we do as those that work within a science, which we think instructional design is. So the design part is really where all of this stuff comes together. And from here, you control every other function that happens in a course design or in a project.
I like how you described it as mission control because to me that's a really good visual. You picture these people behind in front of this gigantic screen, and you're able to see everything that's happening. And it's really important to be able to have that kind of bird's eye view of what's going on in the ISD process. And so that's where the design plan comes into play. Can you talk about some of the key elements that are in a design plan?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
are
I
they?
mean, look at the stuff that you produce in terms of process pieces. So you're looking at probably taking a really deep dive into your analysis information if you've had a chance to do analysis. If not, this is where you formulate the analysis that you need for your project. Make sure your population's right, that you got the right content, all the rest of it. Then you're going to look at producing a design plan. And I think a design plan is one of the key things that instructional designers need to be comfortable with. So all of the elements that's going to go into your course design, into your program, if this is a 2-year project or a 2-hour course, you still need a design plan. And within this design plan are going to be all the elements that you're going to need to make sure that you're doing what you need to do and to prepare that roadmap for the work ahead.
A roadmap, again, is another good visual because when you think about a design plan is made up of many different components, and that those components do make up that roadmap and help to keep a designer in check and from veering off the going off the beaten path, so to speak.
And they will go off the beaten path. And the other thing that I've found that's just fascinating is when I'm working with clients, whether it's one person or a board or a large corporation or the government or whoever, what they like to see is a design plan. They want that thing that they can carry around and show everybody, here's what they're going to do. This is how this is going to work. And look at all this stuff in here. I don't understand any of it, but this is what this does, and this is what these people do. And so design, not just as a process, but as a product. Think of it as both. If you're looking through this chapter, think, what's all this stuff? Well, think of it as process and product. And then you move on to development where you really put together materials and videos and everything else you do. But the product here is your design plan.
It's like a game plan
Yeah.
for both yourself and the team that's going to be incorporating this and doing something with this to create a process. Can you talk about terminal objectives and enabling objectives for the design plan?
So objectives. This is where everybody wants to tune out and go get something to drink because writing objectives is one of the toughest things you're going to do as an instructional designer. And Denise will back this up, and everybody who has done this for a living. And if you ever think that this is something you master completely and never have to worry about again, then you're totally and completely wrong. Because I struggle writing objectives sometimes too, because objectives are so critical to what you do. If you can't write an objective, you'll never put together a good course because you don't have the stuff you need. So when you think about terminal objectives are the exit or some competency that people will be able to demonstrate mastery of when they leave a course. So you think about it, what will they be able to demonstrate? And sometimes these are pretty tough to write because people are more used to writing the individual elements, which we call enabling objectives. And then I have to, capsulize what all this means. Sometimes they really struggle with terminal objectives. But just think about it as the exit competency. And I always tell folks, think about your student or your learner leaving that classroom or shutting off that computer for the last time. And what is it you want them to be able to demonstrate? And that is your terminal objective. Enabling objectives just add up to that. It's the sum of the enablers to get to the terminal. And it sounds easy to do, and I'm not trying to make light of all the work that's involved here because you're going to spend massive hours of your time writing objectives, but that's how important they are. And if you can write a sound objective and you have audience behavior condition and degree, then you have a great course.
That's a great explanation. What are the elements, if you will, in the 9 events of instruction?
So 9 events of instruction goes back to Robert Gagne, who put these together in his work at Florida State with several other folks that I won't name because we all think about Gagne and now none of the rest will make even an indent on you as I mention them. But there was a group of people working on this. So the 9 events of instruction is all back to how people learn. So how do people take information and scaffold it together and come out the other end with something that they'll remember? And if you think about it, what we want to do in learning is get people to remember things, to be able to do a skill, to be able to perform something, to be able to remember something, to remember, a process or a piece of information or how to solve a problem and come up with a solution or whatever. So the 9 events of instruction are the route that a learner takes to learn. And you start out with gaining attention and you go through all of these steps. And what this does, it gets a learner to first focus on the content, then to have a fair idea about what they're going to be expected to do at the end of this period of time that this objective covers, these 9 events cover. And then you get into the body of the work, which is presenting the content and having 3 iterations of application and feedback. Because we know in learning, if someone practices something 3 times, they are far more likely, first of all, to be able to reach mastery, but second of all, to be able to move from short-term to long-term memory. And then in the end, we want to evaluate, and the closing element, which we cleverly call closure, is actually when we want to generalize the information that you've already obtained. So how else can I use this information? And we found that generalization is really a key to people remembering things too. Is they remember it in a silo. I only remember it this way in this specific example of how things were done. But if I can generalize the same content of information and use it in other ways, then I'm going to remember it. I'm more likely to use it in different ways. So the 9 events are about putting together learning and taking a learner from not knowing anything theoretically, except whatever prerequisites they bring in, to them being able to move through content, demonstrate mastery, and then take that information and do some great things with it.
A nice organized system.
Another system in ISD. Can you imagine that?
Another system. But it does hold people accountable. And for me, the way my brain works, I like that structure. And that's what I love about ISD is that it is a system. And if you follow that system and you work really hard to create that system, then you're, I would say, more apt to be successful in the end and to get your students and the learners to mastery, which is the ultimate goal.
And the other thing about all of this structure is it makes things replicable. So one problem we've always had in education and training, back to the one-room schoolhouse, is that it seemed like everybody had to come up with the same idea 300 times. So if 300 people are teaching the same content, there's going to be 300 different ways to do it. And that, to say the least, is not very efficient. So as we look at design, one thing we have here is the ability to replicate what we do. So if it works once, let's use it 1,000 times or 100,000 times and not go back to the drawing board with every new facilitator or teacher. Let's put together, use it, move on.
No need to reinvent the wheel when it's definitely not necessary. One last question, the lesson plan. Can you talk about some best practices for the lesson plan?
Well, lesson plans, you're going to do these a lot of different ways as you get in instructional design. So someone who's a little bit more seasoned and looking through this chapter, you're going to think, oh, I've never done a lesson plan had the 9 events in it. That's just silly. I don't need that. And for some things, I think you can make the case that you don't need to do all 9 events. But what you'll find is you always need to think about the 9 events. Just like most of the things in instructional design, what we talk about in these basic foundational courses and what I talk a lot about in this text is get to know this information and apply it the way that works best for you. So online, 9 events are kind of tough to do sometimes, but you can do them. I've designed lots of courses online and would disperse either synchronous or asynchronous that had the 9 events in them, and you can do it. But what you want to think about is, okay, I need to have a plan for how I implement this. What is my lesson plan? And if I use 9 events, great. If that works for you. But what you want to make sure every time is that, first of all, you prepare the learner. So you need to gain their attention. You need to tell them what the objectives are. Make sure they know why they're there and what they're going to need to accomplish. Present the content. Provide them ample opportunities to take the content and work with it and provide them with as much feedback as they need to be able to assure themselves that they're doing something the way that's supposed to be done. Evaluate them for mastery, and then close out the session by talking about what they've accomplished and then providing a path to generalization with that content. So whether you use the 9 events, whether you use the 7 events, I mean, it really doesn't matter as long as you accomplish these same things.
Thank you for sharing your insights on this, shedding light on this very important topic of design in instructional design. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of Chapter Chats. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. Thank you very much.